everyone, this is Studio X, and today I will be showing you a tutorial of why post effects are very important when working with 3D elements. So I see a lot of videos on YouTube that come out straight out of Cinema 4D with no post effects done, as well as just other After Effects videos with no color correction, no color grading, no post effects, nothing, and there's always so much more to improve. As you can see, the video that was just looping is one of my latest projects, which is like a fake ad for Voss water. There's some water simulation, there's some like flares, lighting effect, and a lot of the stuff is done in post. So the original 3D render looks really bad compared to the final result. So let's go right in. I'll show you the process and basically how I created all of this, and especially if you're using Cinema 4D, it's so easy to work between Cinema 4D and After Effects together. I'll just show you the original footage. Here is basically what came out of the render out of Cinema 4D. So this is the final result. So as you can see, this is very, very bad looking compared to what I just showed you before. So basically it's flying in and there's really nothing special going on, and that was the first shot, and the second shot is right here. So again, there is no depth of field, there is really there's barely anything to even look at. Let's go through the process of how I put this scene together. So I'm gonna use this second shot for probably most of the tutorial, just because I can really show a lot more with the shot than I can with the first one. So first thing I did is, because this is on a empty background, this is on a alpha channel, I just straight up go to layer and make a new solid. I'll just make it white for now, and I just place it behind, and you can just go into effects and presets and just type in ramp. Gradient ramp. I'll choose a radial ramp, move the dot just to the middle, which is 540 in a 1080p composition. Just gonna move this to the angle, and I'm gonna swap the colors. So I'm gonna make this one just slightly brighter than black, and I'm gonna make the outside color black. I'm just gonna make this a tiny bit darker, just so you're already getting a little more range of color, so it's not just on a black background. As you can see, you're getting a lot more out. And just to say, I'm working in a 32-bit comp, so there's a lot more colors that I can play with, and especially that I exported it as an EXR. I will link a tutorial in the description of how to export out of Cinema 4D in an EXR sequence. Basically in every single Cinema 4D video I go through it, and you can just look at any of my Cinema 4D videos and you'll find it there as well. Next thing I did is, you can basically just go into Google and type in Anamorphic Crop, and you can literally just get a video, or not a video, literally just a still. You can just take it and you can just download it, but it's always better to do it in a different way, and I'll show you how as well. But this is usually the fastest and easiest way. That's basically how a lot of people just do it, especially for videos if you're throwing it into like Final Cut. And you can just right click and transform, fit to comp, and boom, you already got an anamorphic crop. I mean, it's always better to render out of Cinema 4D in an anamorphic ratio already. That way you're not rendering all those extra pixels, but I do it sometimes just in case, if I want to, you know, move my project up and down, which doesn't happen too often, but sometimes I just want that extra vertical space. Now that I have that, I'm gonna add the glowing, and the way I do that is I just copy and paste the video, and I go to screen, and let's solo this for now. And in effects and presets, I'm just gonna type in levels, bring in the levels. Let's stretch this out a little more. Okay, so you'll just have to push basically the blacks all the way down, crush them all the way until you get mostly just the white color, and then just push the white. Let's see, there we go. And now you can go in here and just get a fast blur, throw it on here, and I don't know, let's make it just 120 pixels so it's really blurred out, and let's repeat edge pixels for those edges. So now that we can unsolo it, because we have it as a screen, it just adds the white back on top, and it crushes the black a little more. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna copy and paste this layer one more time, but this time we're gonna hit T for opacity and bring down the opacity to maybe 10%. And we're also gonna put another fast blur on this, and we're gonna blur this maybe like 10 pixels, and repeat the edge pixels here. But for the blurriness here, we're gonna push it to 50, and for instead of horizontal and vertical, we're just gonna do horizontal. And if I solo this, you'll see what this does. I'll just bring it out to 100 just so you can see what it does. Basically, what this blurring does is it kind of makes it like this anamorphic lens effect. If you just blur a lot more, you'll see it a lot more defined. So if you just post that over, you can see. And the little 10 pixel blur is just so you don't get a straight edge right here. Otherwise, that just looks really weird. And if you just give it like a 10 or maybe even like a 20, like a 20 pixel blur, is just a nicer, softer edge. So I'm just gonna bring this down back to like 100 or like 120, and I'm gonna bring this down to 50, or let's do like 20%. So we're getting a little softer edge. And next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna just duplicate this one more time and delete the horizontal blur. Bring this to, let's solo this so we can see it. Not like a crazy blur, something very slight, and we can bring the opacity, and let's just level this. Okay, and what that does is it brings like some highlights in, so the glow is a lot more intense. So what we can do now is we can basically rename all these layers so we know what we're working with. So I'm gonna call this main footage. I'm gonna call this main glow. This is my highlight glow, and this is my horizontal glow. Okay, perfect. And this is my, and I'm just gonna call it crop, and this is my crop. So as you can already see, we are getting a way better result than what we started with. It's looking a lot nicer, a lot more cinematic. Now what we need to do is we need to bring in all of the color back in. So as you can see, my original thing is just black and white, and I just want to spice up some color, and blue usually tends to be like a really nice color to bring in. According to some articles that I read online, a lot of people like the color blue. It just looks nice, basically. So scrolling through this video, I'm noticing that I can't really see the water too well, and that could be because of all of the highlights and all the glows that I have on here. So I could just decrease these. So if you just hit T, I'll make this one 50, and I'll make this one 20, and I'll make the horizontal 10. So there we go, starting to look a little nicer. And you can always play with this. So once again, if you just were trying to do all of these glows and all these effects and all the color stuff inside Cinema 4D, once you render it, and that would increase your render time significantly, you know, you can't really bring it back or change it in post. And this is why compositing is very important, because you can always play with this. You can play a lot with the color, with the look, with That's why I render also a depth path separately, which I'll also show in this video, because you can really play with where the focus is shifting from, the iris, and just a lot of different things. Now that we're looking at this, I would want to bring some depth into this, just like I just brought up. For this, I render EXRs because there's a lot of information you can save into them, especially a lot of layers. And After Effects isn't really good with working with the different layers in EXRs, so Nuke is usually a really good program for that, but I'll show this in After Effects either way. So I'm just going to copy and paste my main footage, and I'm just going to hide it and go to Layer, Pre-Compose, and I'm going to call this Depth Map. So I'm going to open this up, and basically I can go into Effect, 3D Channel Extractor, click on this, and you can get the Z depth. So here is the Z depth that I need for my video. So I can just go back in here. I'm gonna move this. All the passes need to be on top of any of the color correction, so that way they don't get affected. Now I'm gonna make a new adjustment layer right here, and I'm gonna rename this to DOF for depth of field. And there's a lot of different plugins, but I really like using this one, Fruchtschluft depth of field. You might have seen it in some of my other tutorials, and what this lets you do is really play with the depth of field. So I'm just going to enable this and the main footage and the background that we have in here. Let me show you how this works. So first I'm going to make an iris that I usually like using, which is a 6-bladed iris, and really geometrical, so you get to see the defocusing on it. When things out of focus, you get these really nice shapes basically. Because I try to give it this anamorphic look, especially with the crop, I usually just rotate it a little bit and I give it a different aspect ratio, so -0.25. So that's gonna look nice. So next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to sharp zone, and what that does is shows you what's in focus. So because my radius is at 0 right now, everything is in focus. Once I start pulling up the radius and really trying to locate my focal point, which you can do just by pressing this and clicking anywhere, but I did not select any depth layers, so I'm just gonna select my main footage too, which I need to replace and call depth map. Okay, so now in the sharp zone you get to press anywhere. So in this case I want it to be on the bottle, and I get to see the sharpness. So if I just start cranking this up, you get to see that more and more things start getting pulled out of focus, so like this in here. So if I go into the normal blur, you'll really start seeing that depth of field happening. If I just disable and enable it, you get to see that right here you're starting to get this really nice out of focusing blurring happening. And if you just really crank these numbers up to like 75, you'll start seeing a lot of the blurring on the front, and you just start seeing overall a way different look than what you had straight out of Cinema 4D. And if you did the depth of field in Cinema 4D, it would just take so much longer to render, and it would not look nearly as nice as if you did it in post using a depth map. Because now I can basically press, and if I want to have the back, lights in focus, I can just press on it, it'll be in focus, and I can really play with where I want the focusing to be. I'll just crank these numbers down a little more just so it's not stressing out. There we go. As you can see now, the back is in focus and the bottle is out of focus. So if I wanted to do a really nice, like let's say for the beginning of the video, I could do, let me render this at quarter resolution. So if I wanted to do, let's say in the beginning, before the water starts pouring, if I want the focus to be on this, and I can keyframe the focal point, hit U just so I can see the keyframe, and then around 20 frames later I want to pull the focus onto the actual logo, I can do that, and I can do that in post without having to go back to Cinema 4D and, after coming up with the idea, trying to re-render it and like come up with, let's say the client wants something to be, you know, in focus in the back first and then in the front. You don't want to go back into Cinema 4D, change your project, play with the camera, and then the client says, oh wait, let's go back, let's you like the first idea more, but let's just like change the color of the car. You don't want to go back to Cinema 4D and change the color of the car when you can just export a like ID pass or like a material pass and then just change it in post. It'll save you so much more time, it'll save you so much more effort, and you can just play with the look a lot more after the render is done. So you don't have to struggle with waiting another day or killing so much time just waiting for your computer to render something. So as you can see here, in the beginning of you just see that it pulls focus from the back to the front, which looks a lot nicer. So now that we have the focusing in place, so let's look at the entire composition now that it's ready. So right here, maybe the glows are really intense, but once again, you can really play with all these values and really come up with something interesting. So maybe I'll just want to, you know, bring some of the details back in. There's just a lot of things you can do. There's so many things you can do. So next thing, like I mentioned, is bringing some color in. And because this is a project from Cinema 4D, as long as your composition settings are exactly the same. So in here, as you can see, my Cinema 4D project is 1920 by 1080 at 30 frames per second. If I go into this composition settings and make sure that it's 30 frames per second, 1920 by 1080, I can just bring this Cinema 4D project in, hide it, and extract the 3D scene data and just delete this. So now I have a camera which follows and goes exactly the same way it did in Cinema 4D. So now what I can do is I can bring in lights. So I can just go to layer, new light, and just call this light 1. I'm just gonna bring this to the center of the comp. So let's go to the very end, and once again I'm just gonna solo the main footage just so I can really see where things are happening. So let's bring this first light, and I'm just gonna bring it in here and see what happens, where it goes. Using these lights, you can add flares, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And once again, I'm just gonna zero these out and just bring this very simply somewhere here. So now that we have lights in here that follow the camera motion, so now you're not just keyframing anything, you're literally using the Cinema 4D data to add post effects. So let's just make this 100, save the project, and make a new solid and call this flares. And I'm just going to use Video Copilot Optical Flares, and I'll show you how this works. So I'm going to change the mode to screen, and once again, anything that affects color needs to be under all the maps, all the passes. So in flares, I'm just gonna choose some kind of interesting looking flare. So I'm just gonna go, I don't know, pro presets, and just choose Russian. Cool. It's gonna look cool. Yep, looks nice. So now, instead of just using a position here, you can go into source type and choose track lights. And the only thing you're gonna need is to lower the intensities, because this is really, really bright. So I'm just gonna bring this down to like 10%, and wow, you're already getting, some nice flares, some nice colors. This is looking really, really, really interesting. So now we can just, all we need to do is just play with the positions of the lights and come up with the look that we're going for. So let's bring this in here. Yeah, just look at that gold shine. and then another one coming up. So as the camera's coming up, you know, you're getting these interesting light spots, and depending on where they're located, you know, because they get closer and farther from the camera, you are getting different intensities. So I said blue before, but let's for this tutorial, I'm just gonna keep it warm, just because I'm using this flare. So I'm gonna bring it under the crop, and let's see how this looks with all of the layers enabled that we add. So this is looking so much more interesting than it did before. So now for depth of field, this is a little out of focus. So once again, you can just press select depth, and because I have these keyframes going, now it's going to be following it basically throughout the entire time. Yep, as you can see. So this is coming out way nicer than it did before. This is let's unsolo these. This was before, this is after. Way more interesting result. Basically, the last thing now is some color correction, which all depends on your style. So you can either like crush it a lot, or you can do the opposite, and I'm just gonna call this CC. You know, flatten the image, whatever you like doing. It's all about artistic style. But this is usually what I do, and you're about to see how I do my colors and how I do my images. I need to put this above the flares. So layering of the layers is very important, as you can tell. I'm just gonna go to edit in Magic Bullet Looks, and I don't use any presets. I just straight up go from my own interest, and currently I want to use some shadows and highlights. What else would I need? Some chromatic aberration, maybe a warm cool filter. Maybe I'll change the color inside the color correction, because there's so many things you can do once again. And lens distortion is very important, and lens vignette, and some edge softness as well. Let's turn all these off and work with each one individually. So first I'm going to go with shadows and highlights, and because once again this is a 32-bit comp, there's a lot of colors you can work with. So you know, you can really crush the colors, or you can really, you know, take out or bring in some colors, some intensity of the brightness, I mean, not colors. I'm gonna bring in some shadows just slightly, and increase the highlights so it's like very, you know, very more punchier in the lights. And for chromatic aberration, I'm just gonna push the red and the blues, just so I get, you know, just on the edges I'm getting some slight colors, so it's not just white all the time. Now for the warm and cool, I'm just gonna, you know, bring it on the cooler side just slightly. There we go. You know, give it a little more variation of tone. And for lens distortion, I'm gonna go the opposite direction basically. So instead of making it look like it's a wide angle, I'm gonna push the corners out so it flattens the image backwards. So as you can see, it gives it more of like a lens effect. There we go, just slightly. For the vignette, you know, I'm just make the corners a little darker, and for the edge softness again, I try not to go too crazy on all these effects. So you know, just like some slight blurring. So now you're getting a very interesting image over here, but I'm gonna try to bring the flares on top of the color correction because it gives them more of a punch. But in this case, I actually don't like the way it looks. So this is what we got to. This is the result that we got to just from this. So if I would have uploaded this, you know, straight up and asked for critique, it's just plain. There is two colors, black, white. There's no depth of field. There's no motion blur, which you can also add using motion vectors by rendering a motion vector spas. There's just so many things you can do with it. This is flat. There's nothing intense about this shot until you start bringing in all these different elements into it. So you know, maybe I don't want to punch these things out too much. You know, maybe I want to bring in some some colors, not some colors, just like some more water into it. You know, if I go to the highlight glow, I'm actually gonna disable it, and in the main glow, you know, play with the colors more. So there's just so much stuff you can do, and there's always areas to improve. So just don't be afraid to add post effects, and especially if you're using Cinema 4D, it's just so easy to bring in all these different layers and all these different passes and really play with the camera animation and everything. There's so much stuff you can add in post and really play with the look of your footage. So hopefully you learned something new. Don't be shy. You can ask for critique on your videos. Just comment on any of my videos and I'll be happy to look at your work and tell you if I have any opinions and anything that you can improve. And you can do the same for me if you think that something sucks that I did, or you see something can be improved. Feel free to comment on it and just be like, hey, I don't like your depth of field is, you know, too shallow, or the colors you use, I think they're wrong, or you know, the tones don't go well. Like anything that you think could use any improvement. You know, this is a community, so everyone should just help out each other. So feel free to leave any comments, leave any feedback. Like someone mentioned that I need to use like background music in my tutorial, so I started doing that, and I think it really helps pace it a lot nicer, so it doesn't seem as boring. Be sure to subscribe, like this video, and if you think these tutorials are helpful, let me know, and I'll be happy to make a lot more of them. So I'll see you in the next one.